She fell for the fake check, and what I heard shocked me. My name is Mark, I'm 36, and I've been married to my wife, Laura, for 8 years. Our life together has been, for the most part, stable. At least, that's what I used to think. We have a comfortable home, decent jobs, and what I assumed was a solid relationship. But lately, things have felt off. It started small, little things I could have easily brushed off. Laura had been glued to her phone more than usual, always tilting the screen away when I walked by. She started locking it, which was odd because we never kept secrets like that before. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Maybe she was just scrolling social media more, or chatting with her friends about harmless things. But then other signs started piling up. Our intimacy had all but disappeared. It wasn't sudden, but it became impossible to ignore. She always had an excuse: too tired, not in the mood, work stress. But it was the way she avoided my touch that hurt the most. The quick, dismissive pecks on the cheek instead of real kisses. The way she'd shift away from me on the couch, leaving a noticeable gap between us. Then there were the shopping trips. At first, it was once a week, then twice. Suddenly, she was out almost every other evening. Just a girls' night, she'd say, but she'd come home late, sometimes after midnight, with barely a shopping bag in hand. When I asked about what she bought, she'd wave it off with a vague answer. A part of me wanted to confront her, but I didn't have anything concrete. I needed proof, something undeniable. That's when I got an idea. A test. I sat at my desk and created a fake check. $50,000. That was the bait. I printed it out on high-quality paper, making sure it looked as real as possible. My name was there, the bank's logo, all the right details. A supposed bonus from work. I placed it on the kitchen table, right where I knew she'd see it. Then, I waited. I positioned myself in the hallway, peeking through the crack of the door to our home office. I felt ridiculous, like some amateur detective. But as soon as I saw her walk into the kitchen, my heart pounded in my chest. She was scrolling through her phone, barely paying attention at first. But then she saw it. The check. Her whole demeanor changed. She froze for a second, then picked it up with both hands, reading every detail carefully. I could see it in her face. Her eyes widened, her lips parted slightly. She ran her fingers over the numbers like she needed to feel them to believe they were real. Then, something unexpected happened. She smiled. Not a small, casual smile. It was big, genuine, almost relieved. She looked around, as if making sure she was alone. Then she pulled out her phone and typed something. A long message. She hesitated, deleted a part, then started typing again. I swallowed hard. My stomach twisted into a knot. Who was she texting? I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. I never thought I'd be the kind of man to spy on his wife. Yet there I was, standing frozen in the hallway, barely breathing, listening to Laura's phone ring in her hand. She answered immediately, her voice slipping into a softness I hadn't heard in years. Darling, finally. He got the prize. Now we can get away from him. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My wife, my Laura, was speaking in a voice so full of love and tenderness that I barely recognized it. And worst of all, I wasn't the man on the other end of that call. A slow, numbing realization crawled up my spine. She was talking about me, about my bonus, about leaving me. I felt sick. My first instinct was to storm into the kitchen and demand answers, to grab her phone and see who was on the other end, to make her say those words to my face. But I didn't. I swallowed my rage and forced myself to think. If she had been planning this for a while, if she was so sure of herself that she could talk this way right under my nose, then confronting her now wouldn't change anything. She'd just lie. She'd twist it, make excuses. Or worse, she'd destroy any evidence before I could find out the whole truth. No, I needed to be smart. I backed away, moving silently toward the office. My hands were shaking as I opened my laptop. If she was willing to say something like that over the phone, there had to be more. Texts, calls, maybe even meetups. I needed proof. That night, after Laura had gone to bed, I installed a hidden camera in the living room. A small, motion-activated device tucked between the books on the shelf, angled toward the kitchen and couch. It was risky. If she found it, everything would be over. But I had to know. The next morning, I repeated the setup. I placed the fake check back on the kitchen table, just as before, making sure it was in plain sight. This time, I didn't bother pretending to be busy. I left for work as usual, but instead of heading to the office, I parked my car down the street where I had a clear view of the house. With my phone in my lap, I opened the live feed from the hidden camera, and I waited. Minutes crawled by. Then, finally, Laura appeared. She walked into the kitchen in her robe, coffee cup in hand, her phone already in her other palm. She didn't even glance at the check at first, just tapped away at her screen, probably scrolling through messages. Then she saw it. She picked up the check, and just like yesterday, her face lit up. Excitement. Relief. And then, like clockwork, she dialed a number. I turned up the volume on my phone, my heart pounding. The same man picked up. Beloved. She breathed into the receiver. There is little left. I can no longer bear his touch. Soon everything will be over, and we will be together. My hands clenched into fists. The words felt like acid in my ears. There was no doubt now. No misunderstanding. No plausible excuse she could give. Laura wasn't just cheating. She was waiting for the perfect moment to walk away with this man. Probably as soon as the money hit my account. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my vision blurring at the edges with anger. But I didn't move. Not yet. I forced myself to stay put, to keep listening. Yes, Laura was saying now, laughing softly. It'll be soon. I just need to make sure he actually deposits it first. Of course, I'll say I want to combine accounts before the wedding trip or something. My stomach twisted. She was already planning how to take the money. Her tone changed slightly, turning teasing. No, he has no clue. He's completely oblivious, as always. I gritted my teeth. Was that what she thought of me? That I was some naive, too blind to see what was happening right in front of me? Well, let her think that. If she wanted to believe I was clueless, I'd let her. I'd let her step on the same rake again and again until she buried herself in her own lies. I just needed more time. The waiting game. For the next 2 days, I repeated the routine. The check stayed on the table. I left, parked down the street, and watched. And like clockwork, Laura called her lover, saying all the same things. Each time, her excitement grew. She wasn't just betraying me. She was savoring it, dreaming out loud about the life she'd have once she was rid of me. I learned his name, Daniel. She spoke to him like he was her world, like he was the only thing keeping her going. And she spoke about me like I was some burden she had to endure for just a little longer. I saved every recording, every word. I barely slept those nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smiling as she spoke to him, whispering sweet nothings I hadn't heard in years. I wanted to lash out, to scream, to confront her and ask her how she could do this to me. But I didn't. Because now, I had a plan. And when I made my move, she wouldn't see it coming. The moment had arrived. For days, I had listened to Laura's calls, gathering every bit of evidence I needed. I had watched her light up at the thought of leaving me, heard her voice dripping with love for another man, and endured every word about how she could barely stand my touch. I had let her believe I was clueless, that she was in control, but not anymore. Tonight, I was taking control back. I set the table with care, placing 2 candles in the center, the soft glow flickering against the wine glasses. Laura always loved this kind of setting. Romantic, warm, intimate. I wanted her to think this was just another ordinary night. The house smelled of rosemary and garlic from the meal I had prepared, steak cooked just the way she liked it, with a side of roasted vegetables. I had even picked up a bottle of her favorite red wine, the one she used to say reminded her of our honeymoon. When Laura walked through the door, she paused, surprised. "Wow," she said, taking in the setup. "What's all this?" I smiled, keeping my voice calm. "I thought we could have a nice dinner together. Just us." She hesitated for half a second, just a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, before she put on that practiced smile. "That sounds amazing." She stepped toward me, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek. The kind of kiss you give someone out of habit, not passion. I pulled out her chair, and she sat down, still looking pleased. For the first few minutes, I played along. We talked about nothing, the weather, her supposed shopping trip earlier in the day, A funny story from work that I barely registered. I let her sip her wine, let her relax. Then, casually, I picked up the remote. You know, I said, swirling the wine in my glass, I found something interesting the other day. I turned toward the TV and pressed play. Laura's smile froze. The video began with a familiar scene. Our living room, the kitchen counter, and then her. Her voice filled the room, sweet and affectionate. But not for me. Beloved, there is little left. I can no longer bear his touch. Soon everything will be over, and we will be together. The glass slipped from Laura's fingers, shattering onto the table. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth like blood spreading across a wound. Her face drained of color. I leaned back in my chair, watching her carefully. Do you have anything to say? She swallowed, her hands shaking as she tried to push out words. This is a joke. This isn't real. Mark, you know I'd never. I pulled a folder from under the table and slid it toward her. Divorce papers. Apparently, you've been waiting for this moment for a long time, I said, my voice steady, controlled. Congratulations. Now you're free. Laura's mouth opened, then closed. Her breath came in quick, panicked bursts. Mark, please, just listen. I said nothing. She grabbed the papers with trembling fingers, flipping through them as if she could somehow change what was written inside. You're serious? You're really doing this? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her hands flew to her phone, and she pressed a number frantically. The moment it started ringing, I already knew who she was calling. Daniel, her so-called beloved. I watched as she waited, her entire body tense, desperate. But no one answered. She tried again. Nothing. I saw the exact moment the realization hit her. Her breathing turned shallow, her eyes darted around like a trapped animal. She wasn't just losing me. She was losing him too. Mark, she whispered, looking up at me, her eyes glistening. Please, let's talk about this. We can fix this. I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly. There's nothing left to fix. Her hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. No, you don't mean that. I made a mistake, but we can work through this. We love each other. I almost laughed at that. Almost. But there was no humor in this moment. Just emptiness. I gently pulled my hand away. No, Laura. I loved you. But you stopped loving me a long time ago. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Mark, don't do this. Please. I don't want to lose you. I looked around the house. The same house we built together. The place filled with memories of laughter, love, and now, betrayal. I had lost her long before tonight. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and walked to the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't shout. I just left. And for the first time in weeks, I felt free. I didn't stay long after I left. I got in my car, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest felt tight, my head buzzing with too many emotions to name. Anger, hurt, relief. I wasn't sure which one was winning. Laura had begged me to stay, pleaded with me not to walk away. But she had already walked away from our marriage long before tonight. I needed to be anywhere but here. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person I knew would understand, Ryan. Ryan had been my best friend since college. He had seen me at my best, at my worst, and now, at my most humiliated. I didn't even have to explain much over the phone. The second he heard my voice, he just said, "Come over, man." So I did. Ryan lived in a small house on the other side of town, just far enough away that it felt like an escape. When I arrived, he was already waiting on the porch with 2 beers in hand. The moment I stepped out of the car, he took one look at me and shook his head. "Laura?" he asked, already knowing the answer. I sighed. "Laura." We sat outside, the cool night air making everything feel a little less suffocating. I told him everything, about the check, the camera, the phone calls, and finally, the dinner where I laid it all out. Ryan listened without interrupting, nodding along, taking long sips of his beer. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "She actually said she couldn't stand your touch?" I clenched my jaw. That was the part that hurt the most. More than the cheating, more than the lies. I had spent years loving this woman, and all the while, she was disgusted by me. Ryan shook his head. "Man, I never liked her. I let out a hollow laugh. You're telling me this now? I didn't want to be that guy, he said, shrugging. But yeah, something always felt off about her. Too fake, too calculating. I stared out at the street, my mind too tired to argue. After a while, Ryan leaned back in his chair and took another sip of his drink. So what now? That was the question, wasn't it? I had no idea. I don't know, I admitted. I just needed to be away from her for a while. I told her to pack her stuff and be gone when I got back. Ryan nodded in approval. Good. You don't need to see her again. Just cut it clean. That had been my plan. But fate had something else in store. I stayed at Ryan's for a couple of hours, long enough to calm down, but not long enough to make him think I was completely falling apart. When I finally drove home, the house was dark. Empty. Good. Laura was gone. The sight of our once shared home looking so lifeless should have made me feel worse, but instead, I felt lighter. The ghosts of her betrayal were still here, but at least she wasn't. I locked the door behind me and sank onto the couch, rubbing my hands over my face. And then my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost ignored it. The last thing I needed was some scam call or, worse, Laura trying to reach me from a different number. But something told me to answer. I picked up. Hello? A woman's voice came through the line, sharp and controlled. Is this Mark? I frowned. Who's asking? A short pause. Then, my name is Emily. I think we need to talk. I'm Daniel's wife. For a second, I couldn't even react. Daniel's wife? I sat up straight. You, what? I know about Laura, she said, her tone clipped, like she had rehearsed this call in her head a dozen times. And I know about my husband. I assume you do too. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. Yeah, I know. Good, she said. Then we should meet. I hesitated. I had barely had time to process everything myself, and now I was being dragged into someone else's mess? Then again, she was in the same boat as me. When and where? I asked. She gave me an address, a small coffee shop downtown. Tomorrow at noon. Can you make it? I'll be there. The next day, I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early, scanning the room for someone who looked like she might be Daniel's wife. It wasn't hard to spot her. Emily was sitting by the window, a cup of coffee in front of her, her fingers tapping against the ceramic. She was composed, well-dressed, her dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail. But her eyes were sharp, cold. She looked up when I approached, her gaze studying me like she was trying to decide if I was worth her time. Mark, she asked. I nodded and sat down across from her. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other, two strangers connected by the same betrayal. Finally, she broke the silence. So, your wife and my husband. I let out a bitter chuckle. Yeah, quite the pair, huh? She exhaled slowly, shaking her head. I had my suspicions for months, but I didn't have proof. Not until I found your number in his phone. That made me pause. My number? She nodded. He had it saved under a different name, but I checked the call logs. He must have had some kind of backup plan in case Laura ever needed to reach him through you. I clenched my jaw. The audacity of it all. Emily took a sip of her coffee, then set it down carefully. I want revenge. That caught me off guard. I had expected anger, bitterness, maybe even tears. But not this. She met my eyes, her expression unreadable. I don't want to just leave him. I want him to pay for what he did. And I need your help. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Okay, what exactly do you have in mind? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced out the window, her fingers tapping against the cup again. I don't know yet, she admitted. I need to think it through. But when I do, I'll need you on board. I studied her carefully. There was something calculating in her gaze, something dangerous. I should have walked away. I should have told her that I just wanted to move on. But I didn't. Instead, I nodded. I'm in. She smiled, a small, knowing smile. Good, she said. Come to my house in 2 days. We'll talk then. As I walked out of the cafe, I realized I had just agreed to something without even knowing what it was. And for the first time in days, I felt something other than anger or sadness. I felt anticipation. 2 days after our meeting at the cafe, I found myself driving toward Emily's house, still unsure of what I was walking into. The entire situation was surreal. Just a week ago, I was a married man living what I thought was a stable life. Now, I was divorced, or at least on my way to it, and about to discuss revenge plans with the wife of the man my ex-wife had been sneaking around with. I told myself this was just a strategic meeting. We were two people with a common goal, nothing more. But as I parked in front of Emily's house, I couldn't ignore the slight tension in my chest, the curiosity mixed with something else I didn't quite want to name. When I stepped inside, I was caught completely off guard. The living room was warm and inviting, the scent of something delicious lingering in the air. A table was set for two, candles flickering, a bottle of wine already open. The dim lighting cast soft shadows on the walls, making the entire place feel intimate. I hesitated in the doorway. This wasn't what I had expected at all. Emily appeared from the kitchen, her dark hair falling loosely over her shoulders. She looked different from when I last saw her, less guarded, more relaxed. She smiled, gesturing toward the table. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I figured we might as well have a nice dinner while we talk." I wasn't sure how to respond. This felt too much like a date, and yet, I didn't mind. I cleared my throat and nodded. "Yeah, sure. This looks great." She poured us both a glass of wine, and we sat down. The food, pasta with a creamy sauce and grilled chicken, was restaurant quality, and after the first bite, I realized how long it had been since I'd had a proper meal. At first, we stuck to small talk, harmless topics, the kind of conversation you have when you're trying to avoid the elephant in the room. We talked about work, about places we had traveled to, even about our childhoods. The plan, the whole reason we were supposed to be here, faded into the background. By the time dinner was over, we had finished most of the wine, and the atmosphere had shifted. Emily leaned back in her chair, twirling her wine glass between her fingers, her eyes studying me with quiet amusement. "You know," she said, "I thought this would be more depressing. Two betrayed spouses plotting revenge. But this actually feels nice." I smirked. "What? You weren't expecting to have a good time?" She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Not exactly." There was a brief pause, and then she stood up. "Do you want to watch a movie? Something light, so we don't sit here stewing in bitterness?" It sounded better than going home to an empty house. "Yeah," I said. "That sounds good." We moved to the sofa, bringing the wine with us. Emily scrolled through her streaming service, eventually settling on something neither of us had seen before. But in truth, the movie barely mattered. We were still talking, still getting to know each other. And then, at some point, the conversation slowed. The space between us shrank. I didn't even realize how close Emily had moved until I felt her hand on my leg, light, tentative. My heart jumped slightly, but I didn't pull away. She turned her head toward me, her eyes meeting mine, searching for hesitation. I should have hesitated, but I didn't. She leaned in, and before I knew it, our lips met. The kiss was slow at first, unsure, testing the waters. But then, something shifted. The moment stretched, deepened, turned into something neither of us had planned. It wasn't just a kiss, it was an escape. A way to forget, even if just for a moment, the betrayal, the humiliation, the pain. For what felt like 20 minutes, we lost ourselves in it. And then, the sharp click of a door unlocking. We froze. The front door swung open, and there he was. Daniel. He stepped inside, expecting to see his home just as he had left it, expecting to see his wife alone. Instead, he saw us. His expression twisted into pure shock, his body going stiff as he took in the scene. The wine glasses, the dim lighting, and most of all, Emily and me, still tangled up on the couch. For a brief second, I felt my stomach drop. I wasn't afraid of him, not really, but the situation had escalated faster than I was prepared for. But before I could react, Emily tightened her grip on me, her voice calm, almost amused. "Don't pay attention," she murmured, tilting my face back toward hers. I barely had time to process what was happening before her lips were on mine again. Daniel was right there, standing in the doorway, his fists clenched, his breath uneven. But Emily didn't care. And for some reason, neither did I. I kept my focus on her, letting the moment play out exactly how she wanted it to. Daniel could watch. He could feel exactly what I had felt when I discovered what he had done. And judging by the look on his face, he finally understood.